Hi, Bright Yoga Space community. It's Emily here. So happy Friday. It's been a while since I've been on here live actually, and it feels like a good time to come back on and to carry on what I've kind of started a few weeks ago, which was delve into a little bit of philosophy on a Friday. A nice way to finish off the working week. So for those of you who maybe have only really experienced yoga as a very physical practice, the idea of philosophy might turn you off in some way or might feel a little bit inaccessible. But yoga is really actually philosophy. It's not just a physical practice, although, what we do on our mat in, say, an asana class can very much touch on those aspects, onto those philosophical aspects. Philosophy comes from a Latin word, philosophia, which means a love of knowledge or a love of wisdom. And, it's not something that we need to nerd out about. It can be really accessible. It's really just this embracing of knowledge and of wisdom, and it runs through all of the ancient wisdom traditions that we're so blessed to have been given and gifted from the teachers through the ages, from many different cultures. Yoga is just one of them, but in these little sections that I'm going to do on Instagram, on IGTV, I'd love to talk about yogic philosophy, but also bring in what I've learned from Buddhist teachings, from the mystical traditions, even from the ancient pagan culture and mythology as well. So there's so much rich goodness to learn from in terms of philosophy, in terms of stories of the Buddhist psychology. So many great tools and ways of thinking about the world that we can draw on. So I wanted to start with something that is quite accessible in general, in terms of yoga philosophy, and many people will already have heard of Patanjali, the sage of modern yoga in a way. And Patanjali wrote a book, or wrote some passages, some sutras called, and they're called the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. So it's a very well-known group of teachings in the modern yogic classical yoga. There's all sorts of knowledge bodies that go way further back than that, but it's quite an accessible little group of philosophical ideas that we can relate to in a way. And if you go to a modern yoga class, there are lots of things that are within the sutras that you have probably come to understand through breath and use of your body and postures and meditation. So it's probably not going to be completely out of your depths to start with the 8 limbs of yoga from Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. So over the next 8 weeks, I'm going to address one of those limbs. So I'm just going to introduce them today, and then next week I'll start with the first limb. And I wanted to start with one of the first sayings, one of the first kind of sutras that Patanjali explores, which is in Sanskrit, Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha. Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha, which means yoga is the stilling or the cessation of fluctuations or disturbances in our mind. Mind being a quite expansive version of mind that includes our whole sense of being. So yoga is this state of which we can start to still the disturbances of our mind. Yoga has lots of other different meanings and definitions, because Sanskrit is such a interesting language that every word in Sanskrit can have different layers and different depths of meanings. But yoga as a stilling of the fluctuations or disturbances of our mind is a really useful concept to think about. And then Patanjali goes on to really take us through what are his 8 limbs or 8 petals of yoga, and they're really tools that we can use to achieve that state of inner peace and inner kind of our true nature. So if you're joining me live, I'm just introducing Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. It's Philosophy Friday, and I'm going to be talking in more depth about each of the sutras over the next 8 weeks. But today I'm just introducing the concept of these sutras and the idea that yoga is this state of the stilling of the disturbances of the mind, yoga chitta vritti nirodha. And so the 8 sutras, the 8 limbs, that Patanjali talks to us about are the yamas, the yama, which is the first limb, and really a kind of moral guidelines in a way. So ways that we can be in the world in relationship with others. So yama is the first step. The first limb, and so I'll talk about that next week in more depth. There are 5 of those, and they are really kind of guideposts on how we can live our lives in order to not create more disturbances in our lives, ways of relating to other people, relating to ourselves, so that we stop that cycle of creating more tension in our being. And then the niyamas are our kind of internal controls. So things that we can do in our own space, in our own bodies, cleansing practices, study, so that we can, again, with that same idea of stopping that cycle of creating more toxicity and more tension in our body. So the yama and the niyama are 2 kind of guidelines around how we live in the world. And then the 3rd limb is asana. So, for many people, yoga is all about asana. It's all about making our bodies into shapes and postures. And so you might have heard the word asana. It's at the end of a lot of asanas. Virabhadrasana, warrior pose. Asana is the 3rd limb, and I'll talk a little bit about that. And then we go to pranayama. Pranayama is breath work, how we use the control or the expansion of our breath, or our energy, and it really relates to the energetic body. So that's the 4th limb. And then we have pratyahara, which is the 5th limb, which is the withdrawal of our senses, so turning inwards. Talk about that. And then we move into dharana, which is concentration. And so a type of or a tool that we use for meditation. So dharana is concentration. So there are many different types of ways of meditating and mindfulness, where we bring a concentrated state to our body and our mind. Again, all of these with the intention of stilling the fluctuations, the disturbances of our mind. And then the 7th limb of yoga is dhyana, which is meditation, and a state of meditation, a state where we become, the mind becomes much more still and much more absorbed into the point of focus, the point of concentration. Meditation states are, we sort of don't talk about a goal of meditation, but dharana is, the state that we are embodying when we practice meditation. And then the last limb is samadhi, and samadhi is this idea. Sometimes it's called nirvana in Buddhism, in the bliss state, a state where we really understand our connection with all beings and all of nature, all of everything. We become one, and so then we come to that other definition of yoga. Yoga is union, yoga of integration. So samadhi is this real sense of integration of ourselves with everything. So we sort of lose that sense of the little sense of self and become that big sense of self. So we'll go into that in a little bit more detail. And some, when we start to get to those more subtle elements, it starts to become more kind of fluid, and it can bring up lots of questions. So I'd love you guys to join me live for this so that you can ask questions and I can answer them, because that's so helpful. I love answering questions about philosophy in particular, which of course is yoga. So those are the 8 limbs. I'm going to be delving into them more deeply for the next 8 weeks on a Friday, at about midday on a Friday. I'll maybe post before I'm coming live, an hour before, so that you can join me live if you can. And let's enjoy some Friday philosophy. And if you're in lockdown at the moment, use this as an opportunity to do some self-knowledge, some svadhyaya, and join me to learn a little bit more about this aspect of yoga. There's so much more too, but we're going to start with these basics. All right, catch you soon, guys. Bye.